like the Earth of 100 years ago. Our mind still has its darkest Africas, its unmapped Borneos and Amazonian basins. In relation to the fauna of these regions, we are not yet zoologists. We are mere naturalists and collectors of specimens. The fact is unfortunate, but we have to accept it. We have to make the best of it. However lowly, the work of the collector must be done before we can proceed to the higher scientific tasks of classification, analysis, experiment, and theory making. I wrote that in my journal, and I knew it was from a book, but I couldn't remember which. I hadn't written the reference. So I copied the quote into ChatGPT to ask where it was from, and it said, "That was a passage from the book The Varieties of Religious Experience, a Study in Human Nature by William James, published in 1902. That didn't seem right. I don't recall reading that, so I replied, "Is it?" It responded, "My apologies for the mistake. The passage you provided is actually from The Misuse of Mind, a study of Bergson's attack on intellectualism by Karen Stephen, published in 1922. Again I asked, "Is it though?" You're correct to question that. Upon further reflection, the actual source is Psychology, the briefer course by William James. Thank you for your patience, and I appreciate you bringing this up to my attention. I then trusted my instinct and leafed through some books of mine. The passage is actually from an excerpt of Aldous Huxley's book titled Heaven and Hell. An apt conversation between man and machine to complement the opening passage for the episode about my time at the psychiatric hospital. A sort of liminal space, a limbo, for my new temporal identity to take shape. Before we get going, let me add another. One is harassed, both day and night, by the divine being that is the image of the living self within the locked labyrinth of one's own disoriented psyche. The ways to the gates have all been lost. There is no exit. One can only cling, like Satan, furiously to oneself and be in hell, or else break and be annihilate, at last, in God. From The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. Welcome to the Art of the Covenant. I've started emerging out of my cocoon and returning very slowly back on stage to do stand-up. I don't know why it's taken me this long. Maybe fear, maybe ambivalence, maybe time to heal. I was recently diagnosed as severely depressed, which took me by surprise. Depressed, sure, but severely. That's quite an interesting adjective. At least it explained a few things. I started stand-up in February 2008, but as you can imagine, my madness, this entire first season of the podcast, took me out of the comedy game, and it was difficult to find anything funny, let alone be funny. Each time I took a step on stage, oh man, I was so happy. And much like riding a bicycle, I hadn't forgotten the skills I'd earned. And in fact, there was something strangely new and exhilarating now, although I can't quite put my finger on it. Perhaps it was that I once did stand up for me, for how it made me feel, for the success it could afford me. And perhaps now I do it for that still, but also for the audience. Actually considering how time with me could benefit them, and time with them could benefit me, at least comedically, and maybe somehow inspire them creatively, psychologically, spiritually. I did a show this week, and it was fine, just normal new material night. It almost felt like going through the motions, maybe clinging on to a past life. But then an audience member messaged me online, and it kind of revived in me a desire to return to stand-up comedy. He wrote, You activate my desire and inspiration to write again. It was amazing seeing you all honest and real on that night. I say amazing in that way because it's written in caps lock. For real. Out of nowhere, you became a great inspiration. I hope to catch more performances as you do and more art you'll create. I normally wouldn't share this, but I want to thank audience members who take the time to message artists they see. It can be difficult to keep that spark going, so a message like this can make a whole world of difference. Thank you for supporting me, and I am very excited to get back on stage again. Anyway, back to the story. Is anyone else scared they're getting brainwashed? Like, even if you keep a lookout for possible manipulation, it's often difficult to trace back where Ariadne's thread really began to lead you. Maybe it's not something to be scared of. Like, everyone needs a good clean every now and then. It just depends on who's giving you the bath and what the soap's made of. I only think of this because I saw a movie recently called Soft and Quiet. Ah, what a brutal, brilliant horror film. If you're into horror, check that one out. It's real. It reminded me a little bit of, if I'm getting this correct, Eden Lake. It's a horror, but it's a horror that is, if you like, quote unquote possible without taking the supernatural into account, right? It's just people. Terrifying. Masterful pacing. Really, really enjoyed it. And it had me thinking, like, the books I read, the movies I watch, the media I consume, the people I've referenced, perhaps misinterpreted, misquoted. I sometimes forget to pay attention and wonder, wait a minute, who wrote this novel? Commissioned this screenplay? For what purpose? How is it affecting my brain? Is my identity already in some chain reaction and there's no stopping the outcome? What about this podcast? If you can look into the seeds of time and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak them to me. That's what Macbeth says in Act 1, Scene 3. What about Romeo, Fortune's fool, Act 3, Scene 1? And can we break it? Then I defy you, stars, Act 5, Scene 1. As Gloucester expresses in Act 4, Scene 1 of King Lear, the gods, they kill us for their sport. On that fateful day, I became a tabula rasa, a blank slate. They strapped me to a stretcher, 5150'd, referring to the California Law Code for the temporary involuntary psychiatric commitment of individuals who present a danger to themselves and others, and sent to Alhambra Psychiatric Hospital in Los Angeles. As previously mentioned, I was greeted by someone named Genesis, which I thought was a bit on the nose. You know, at this point, there was no such thing as coincidence anymore. It all seemed carefully constructed. They stripped me off my clothes and dressed me in undifferentiated robes. Patients on psychiatric units are too sick to make decisions about attire because risque or revealing outfits might trigger others. The seductive belt and shoes with their tempting laces were the first to be removed to avoid any strangulation. And like children at the theme park, we all waited patiently in line for our prescribed pills so that we may go on a ride with unknown ups and downs, twists and turns. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still in hospital, and the experience I'm currently having is the brain's way of making sense of healing and finding the highest virtue and possibility for myself to become. I had a nice enough time at the hospital. I didn't feel as though I was missing out on some other place or time because I can't teleport. I am where I am. However hard that may be, that's the cards I've been dealt, so I'll play that hand, win or lose. I was roaming the halls, attempting to work out why I was here. Not just some grander meaning for this one life I've been given, some attempt at some seeing of the bigger picture, but here and now. Why was I in this space and time? Connotations of colours, of words, they start coming back to me, and I wondered whether those associations had value or if they were incorrect. Knowledge from a previously flawed self. Everything was a puzzle, everyone an enigma. It was kind of exhilarating. Like I found a carton of milk that was out of date behind a bed, and I decided to drink it, thinking it might unlock something, a new room perhaps. It didn't. The milk, having expired, was curdled and disgusting. But it did make me laugh, though, as if a part of me knew it was ridiculous. But I believed I was suddenly involved in some sort of game. But I just didn't know the rules. And so everything became trial and error to discover the path forward. In the upcoming months, years, I would do things like that. I ate all sorts of bugs, worms, ants, spiders. I put pages of book in a blender and drank it like a smoothie because if you truly are what you eat, I've digested the information of a book without needing to read it. That's a very smart way to imbibe data. Saves on all sorts of time reading. I ate rocks, metal, tree bark, random mushrooms, which my friends later told me, yeah, that's dangerous. But here I am, either a fool lucky to still be alive, or as a consciousness that's transcended death. Maybe that mushroom was poisonous, and the body that ate it now lays in a ditch on the side of a highway, choking on his own vomit. Yet I still live. In a dream, as an astral projection, a ghost, or as a completely different manifestation. The most recent thing I ate, which was weird, that was a couple of weeks ago. I saw a golden sticker in the shape of a star. I just gobbled it up. And then, in a moment of complementary to speech act theory, I said, I eat stars. I assume I did that to make myself laugh, but who knows? Disorientation leads to suggestibility. Once the logical mind sees the unbelievable, it's hard to know what is and isn't real anymore. Suddenly, the detective and the informant are in cahoots, bellowing streams of consciousness like two friends waiting for Godot. Madness makes sense. Musings and ramblings possible. When people blink, that could be Morse code for something within the husk of their host. Sometimes I look at a map of the Earth and I imagine it's the archipelago of something much larger. Countries, those could be regions in the brain, in consciousness, but we experience them as physical because that's easier for a smaller mind to comprehend. All of this is far-fetched, yet kind of makes sense for me. Possible, even. Meanwhile, I'm in hospital and the doctors tell all the patients to roam and mingle with one another as if it was a speed dating event, some experiment to see if incomprehensible lunatics make sense to one another. My time at the hospital was healing. I recommend everyone losing their mind at least once. What an adventure. One day I lay there, meditating, in the corpse pose of this temporary home, slowly taking my time to reanimate the body. Slowly. By moving a pinky, one tiny flick of the little finger, which feels like a giant movement, like the paralyzed bride wiggling her big toe in a pussy wagon. In the obsidian, blanketed underneath my closed eyes, I could see the movement as electrical signals, hovering in an empty space devoid of gravity. I revive another finger, and once again I see the circuitry involved, the communication between the brain and its parts. For some reason, I only see the return signals from finger to brain, probably because I can't feel the brain's messages to the finger. But I can the response, the actual movements of the phalanges through the specific muscles used, up the shoulders, and imagination finishes the rest, up the spine and motor cortex. I began to move on my fingers and toes simultaneously as if I were masterfully playing the piano with both hands and feet. And I am suddenly dazed by a fluorescent display, a firework in the shape of a human, large tentacles with sensory wires protruding out of a glowing bulbous center, the brain, resembling a bioluminescent cephalopod in our deep ocean. I open my eyes and return to the present moment in the psychiatric hospital where a nurse tells me there's a phone call for me. It's your mom, they tell me. I get to the phone booth in the corridor, pick up the receiver, and on the other side is the voice of my ex-wife. I immediately burst out laughing. Is this a joke? During our relationship, she told me I needed mothering due to my abandonment issues, and here we are, doctors having me act out this Oedipus complex over the phone. You can see why I was confused about reality. I had taken part in complex pranks before. I was in a pilot episode of Impractical Jokers for the BBC. It's a series and it's also a movie, so if The Matrix is real, then all of this can surely be a program, a simulation to run for, I don't know, bachelor parties across infinity, pranks across the multiverse. My divorce was a legal separation, but it was not a spiritual one. In fact, somehow, I've grown to love her more, and yet it may be nevermore. I now gamble with God that the afterlife is true, that I might once again be with her, and she with me, for we did say, till death do us part. Nothing made sense. Every new piece of information learned wasn't kept for long, because there was a constant unraveling. Like I once read a fascinating story about an experiment, although it may have been the other way around, about a scientist who would torture a type of tapeworm to gather results about memory. He would send flashes of light and then electrocute a specimen to see its reaction. The worm would roll into a protective ball, resembling as much as possible a sphere protecting its most sensitive region. This experiment was repeated until the worm had adapted to the information, displaying this evolution by morphing into this new adaptive defensive stance. It would go into a ball before the electric shock to avoid the pain. The scientist, knowing the tapeworm's ability to grow new limbs, sliced it in two. The head grew a tail, and the tail grew a head, to repeat the experiment on what is now two new specimens, hypothesizing the original brain would remember the first experiment, while the new one would have to be taught again. But on the second experiment's first attempt, the scientists discovered the two had kept the information, showing the original tail had a muscle memory which could transfer to a new brain. The clones now had the same information. The scientists repeated the conditioning with a fresh tapeworm and, knowing the species to be cannibalistic, cut and reduced the sample into a mash to feed it to one of its brothers and sisters who had not been through the process, and therefore did not know a flash of light resulted in electrocution. After digestion, the scientists flashed it light three times on this worm who had eaten a family member with the memory of the process, and discovered the worm rolled into a protective ball. These results proved that information and behavior could be relayed in the muscular structure of a body without the need for the brain. And this updating of memory, although only tested on the conditioned tapeworms of that species, existed in digestion. That's all I know from that experiment. I know not the intention of that scientist and where the worm exists on the cartography of conscious existence. But it's interesting. A fresh start, a clean slate is something to be desired. That's why people like the new year. It can force them to consciously change, improve something about their life. But when it's all been deleted, a true tabula rasa, it's difficult to know in what directions to go. And I don't just mean physically, geographically. Although that too was hard for me, because I have a French passport, meaning the whole of Europe is a possible place for me to just not travel, but live for weeks, months, years. The UK, with its Brexit bugaboo, forced me to have the British passport, and now I have the remnant of that empire to explore. And I have the United States green card, which is a country big enough for many lifetimes. So where do I go? What do I do with my life? Every job now seems interesting. I could be a priest. What about a career criminal? Maybe the two go hand in hand. Like if death is not real, as I so like to claim. Can I be a hitman? It wouldn't really matter since we'd just go to whatever next level there is, right? Ah, would I be a lovely assassin with morals? Or would I be extra naughty with a side of devilish? Oh, maybe a serial killer. Oh, if so, would I eat my victims? And would I remember their memories? Okay, so what about a professional baseball player? I don't know, a plumber, a sommelier, pet food taster, snake milker, golf ball diver, professional mourner. I'm sorry for your loss. Human statue, stripper, train conductor. Ah, so many choices. Have you ever heard of the Shannon number? Named after the mathematician Claude Shannon, it is the amount of possible positions in a game of chess that can exist. After only 10 moves, 5 for each player, the number of games is over 69 trillion. 69,352,859,712,417 moves, which is more than there are stars in the observable universe, all on one small board. So what move should I make? As Thomas Huxley once said, grandfather to Aldous, the chessboard is the world. The pieces are the phenomena of the universe. The rules of the game are what we call the laws of nature. The player on the other side is hidden from us. It's no wonder we can all sometimes find ourselves crippled with an inability to know what we should do with our lives, from the short-term tactics of daily decisions to long-term strategy for some unknowable future. I mean, in chess, it's easy. The only goal is to defend your king and checkmate your opponent. But life has a variety of destinations and origins. Like some Escher painting on which a pawn plays chess on a chessboard and attempts to give himself meaning by pretending to wear a crown, because after all, are we not all duty-bound to protect ourselves as if we were all our own heads of state? With practice, you get better at the game and you learn many theories and mistakes, which eventually allows you to see patterns from which you can flow your important pieces to victory. I'm curiously grateful to have experienced such a story, despite the reverberating trauma surging beneath my skin. With all of that, you might be able to imagine how challenging it is to know which moves I should make and where I should position myself. Who am I on the board? Who am I playing with? Against? My fractured self even has me wondering if I'm the board itself. Time will tell. And in the psychiatric hospital, I was in a state of zugzwang. Zugwang. Zugwang, zugzwang. With only my instincts to rely on. Zugzwang is it's a German word for when whatever move you make, it's going to be a bad one. Is it so bad that I would stare directly at the sun? That's something I used to do. I just don't know anymore. I'd look up at the sun until I couldn't anymore and close my eyes to observe the colours burning the optic nerve. A bright sphere, sometimes green, sometimes red, enveloped in the darkness underneath my eyelids, floating among the debris of broken microscopic fibres drifting in my vitreous jelly of the eyeball, which I often see in my field of vision in bright light. There's like stuff in my eyeballs, broken bits of eye that I've had my whole life, casting tiny shadows that look like a dozen translucent wormholes lingering in view, hovering between my cornea and retina. I like to play with them by trying to get a good view of those strings, but they dart away as fast as hummingbirds every time the eye moves to look at them. My very own quantum decay. And on rare occasions, with a bright background, my eyes pick up tiny orbs of light travelling in unison across a grid-like pattern, punctual zigzags of some wavelength that I can somehow see. The schizophrenic is a soul not merely unregenerate. Unregenerate? The schizophrenic is a soul not merely unregenerate, but desperately sick into the bargain. His sickness consists in the ability to take refuge from inner and outer reality, as the sane person habitually does in the homemade universe of common sense. The strictly human world of useful notions, shared symbols and socially acceptable conventions, the schizophrenic is like a man permanently under the influence of mescaline, and therefore unable to shut off the experience of a reality which he is not holy enough to live with, which he cannot explain away because it is the most stubborn of primary facts, and which, because it never permits him to look at the world with merely human eyes, scares him into interpreting its unremitting strangeness, its burning intensity of significance, as the manifestations of human or even cosmic malevolence, calling for the most desperate countermeasures, from murderous violence at one end of the scale to catatonia or psychological suicide at the other. And once embarked upon the downward, the infernal road, one would never be able to stop. That now was only too obvious. A little passage from Aldous Huxley's Door of Perception. I'm not suggesting I'm schizophrenic, nor am I. There's a movie called Infinite, which I recently saw, about a schizophrenic man who discovers that his hallucinations are actually visions from past lives. Again, just stories. It doesn't mean what we ingest as reality, truth, which is why it's important, I think, to keep an open mind, an open heart, and a fraction of self-doubt to leave room for new information to be accepted in, digested, and then either forced out or absorbed. On my last day at the hospital, I leave behind some friends I'd made, friends I'd never see again. One was named Emmanuel, and he gave me this book that he was reading, which he tells me might be useful on my journey, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. Suddenly it struck me, this is a video game. As if obvious, I tell him, your name is Emmanuel. Not only is that another name for Jesus, but also Emmanuel, as in E-manual, like email, electric manual. You're the personification of the manual that I need to know about the rules of this video game. And he then said, I see why they locked you up. And we laughed and parted ways. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is a collection of thoughts, mantras, meditations, useful to navigate the world, the logos. I recommend it to anyone. Whether you need a little guidance or not, they offer valuable insight to make sure the tabula rasa lands on terra firma. This video game simulation I claim to be in has value in that I treat my avatar as if I had to level up with as many skills as possible, like a Sims character, whose barometer tells me when it needs feeding. Unfortunately, there is no augmented reality in my frame of vision, alerting me, telling me that there is some treasure in a particular direction, or what my target is, and which NPCs in a dark alley will trade herbs and pelts I collect along the way for my money and mana. I'll leave you on a passage from this book, which I hope can be of use to you on the journey. Human life. Duration, momentary. Nature, changeable. Perception, dim. Condition of body, decaying. Soul, spinning around. Fortune, unpredictable. Lasting fame, uncertain. Sum up. The body and its parts are a river. The soul a dream and mist. Life is warfare and a journey far from home. Lasting reputation is oblivion. Then what can guide us? Only philosophy. Which means making sure that the power within stays safe and free from assault, superior to pleasure and pain, doing nothing randomly or dishonestly and with imposture, not dependent on anyone else's doing something or not doing it, and making sure that it accepts what happens and what is dealt as coming from the same place it came from, and above all, that it accepts death in a cheerful spirit, as nothing but the dissolution of the elements from which each living thing is composed. If it doesn't hurt the individual elements to change continually into one another, why are people afraid of all of them changing and separating? It's a natural thing, and nothing natural is evil. Thank you so much. Today was a slightly slower paced, quiet episode. But I thank you for joining me, and see you next time.